Welcome back, guys, to another episode of the 5-Year Plan. My name is Anna, I am your host, and usually this is the part of the episode where I say, and we are here to talk about all life plans that did not go according to plan. But that is not entirely accurate today for two reasons. Number one, that is not what we're going to be talking about today. Today, I'm giving you a behind the scenes look at what it's been like to build this podcast. I'm going to be answering all of the questions you guys sent in to me about the ups and the downs, the challenges, etc., all of that. Okay, so that's what this episode is about, and that's what we're going to get into today. But the second reason why I don't really want to say that tagline is because I'm not sure it's entirely accurate. And let me tell you what I mean by that. Over the last several weeks, I have been thinking a lot about what it is that I'm trying to achieve with this podcast. And obviously, I think there's the element of normalizing this period in a lot of people's lives where you feel uncertain, whether it's about your career or your romantic relationships or your personal life or your identity. And I cannot tell you how amazing it's been to hear about all of these different stories, whether it's stories from my guests, whether it's stories from my friends who have approached me after listening to certain episodes, whether it's stories from, honestly, people around the world. Like, I have had people reach out to me from different parts of the world. I had a girl reach out to me from the US about an experience that she had and something she just wanted to share with me after listening to one of these episodes. I had a girl reach out to me from Copenhagen who shared with me her story about her pivot from being a doctor to an actress. It is an absolute honor that this podcast has sort of gone beyond the immediate circle of my friends who are just listening to it to support me and impacted and touched people around the world. That has been amazing. But I think I want to do more than just talk about these feelings and normalize these feelings. When I think about what I actually want to achieve with this podcast, I take myself back to a moment I had back in 2020. The first time I got into podcasts was back in 2020. I think like a lot of people, because, what else was there to do during the pandemic? And I remember the first podcast show that I really latched onto was a show called How I Built This by Guy Raz. And for anybody listening to this podcast right now, I would highly recommend you check it out. It's an incredible show, and it basically gives a behind the scenes look at the biggest companies in the world and how their founders built them. So I remember listening to an episode with Sarah Kraus, and for those who don't know who that is, she is the founder of Swell, like the water bottle company. Now, obviously today we know what Swell is. We've all seen their water bottles. We've probably all had one at some point. But she talked about like the many, 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 many failures and rejections and no's that she got before the company became what we know it to be today. And I don't know what it was, but there was just something about that story, about the behind the scenes look, about learning about that progression from 0 to 1 that just flipped something in me and it inspired me to do something. At the time, I had been contemplating for like months about starting this non-profit project where my idea was I would create music covers in exchange for donations. And the idea was all the money that I was going to raise was going to go towards food banks in Canada. And I did ultimately launch that project. It was called Keys for COVID. But I only did it. Like, I only had the guts to do it after I listened to that episode. And I think that that is sort of what I want to achieve with this podcast, which is, yes, it's about building community. It's about normalizing these feelings of uncertainty. But I also want people to be inspired to take the steps, to do the thing that's hard, to go against the grain, and to go after the life that they want. That's all to say that I'm contemplating. Wow, I don't know why I'm saying that word so weird. That is all to say that I'm contemplating changing or modifying my quote unquote tagline of life plans not going according to plan. Obviously, that is the core of what this show is about, but I think that it can just be a little bit more. So, if you have any suggestions, if you have any insights, or even just want to share like what this show feels like to you, I would love to hear all of it. So, leave a comment below. If you're watching this on YouTube, comment on this video, please. If you're just listening to it and you maybe just follow me on social media, feel free to message me. I check every single message I get. So if you do send me a message, it will not be lost. I will read it, I will respond, and I will value it. And I guess while we're at it, if you like this podcast, if this podcast has done something for you, please feel free. And you know what? I keep saying feel free, but I'm actually going to ask you, listener, my fellow lovely listener, to like this podcast on whatever platform you're listening to, subscribe if you wish, and share it if you think that there's somebody else in your life that would benefit from listening to these type of stories and topics. I remember when I used to listen to podcasts and I would hear that like clip of the host being like, oh, share, like, subscribe to this podcast. It's going to help so much, yada, yada. And I was thinking like, it's not going to help that much. Uh, but it does. It really does. It's the reason why certain podcasts pop off and are able to be successful, while others, even if they're just as great in terms of the content and the effort and the quality, don't. And just one last quick thing before we get into this episode, which is that if you ever want to send me a question that you have, you can do it in one of three ways. Number one, you can comment on any of my posts, whether that be on social media or YouTube or even Spotify or Apple Podcasts. I read every single comment that comes through. The second way is you can send me a DM on Instagram. Like I said, I read every single message that I get. And the third way is probably my preferred way, which is the Confessions Vault. I will post a link to the Confessions Vault in the episode description below, but this is basically a dedicated place where you can share with me all the thoughts that you have. And this is also a place where if you've got a story or if you've done a life pivot that you want to share, this is where you post it. This is where you can tell me about it. And people who've been following this podcast for a while know that I like to share these stories on the show. So if you've got a good one and you want to share it, the Confessions Vault is the place to go. So now, without further ado, guys, let's get into this episode. Okay, so if you follow me on my Instagram, many of you know that I was asking you guys to send in questions over the last few days in preparation for this episode. And I want to thank you, first of all, because I received 38 questions, which is way more than I thought I was going to receive. So maybe this means that maybe I should do more episodes like this. I don't know. You tell me. You guys tell me. But that's all to say, I will not be answering 38 questions today. That's a lot of questions to go through. I'm only going to be answering a select few, but I will probably make another episode like this where I do answer some of these other questions because all of these questions are so great and so thoughtful. Okay, so the first question I got was, what is one thing that has shaped who you are today the most? Okay. Wow. This is both, I think, an easy and difficult question to answer. It's hard because it's hard to pinpoint the one thing that has shaped an individual. But it's also easy because I think that a lot of what I have done, or at least a lot that I feel that I've accomplished that I feel very proud of, has stemmed from sort of one lesson that my dad really drilled into me when I was a kid, which is when I was younger, any time that I was doing something and I was having a hard time doing it, and I would, throw my hands in the air and say, "Ugh, I can't do this," right? My dad would make me repeat the sentence, like literally say the sentence again out loud, but change the beginning from I can't to how can I. So, for example, if I was doing a puzzle and I couldn't figure out how to, complete this puzzle, it was too hard or whatever, and I said, "Oh, I can't do this puzzle." My dad would literally make me say out loud, "How can I do this puzzle?" And when you're a kid, this is really annoying because you just want to give up, right? Like the last thing you want to do is sit there for more time, more hours on end trying to figure out this like damn puzzle that doesn't really matter at the end of the day. But this how can I mentality that my dad was so insistent on instilling in me when I was a kid really shaped, I think, how I eventually looked at challenges that I had throughout my life. It taught me that when you're faced with a challenge, don't acquiesce. The question instead that you should be thinking is, how can I? How can I solve this problem? How can I overcome this challenge? And when you change your thinking to think like that, you're going to be able to come up with way more solutions. You're going to be way more creative. And if you're able to shift your mindset into that how can I mentality, then the world is your oyster. You can do anything. But if you're always in the mindset of, oh, I can't do this, I can't do that, then you can't. That's it. It's over. Okay. The second question is a question I get asked all the time, which is, how are you balancing your full-time job as a lawyer with the commitment of your podcast? Okay. Michelle Obama's got this great quote, which I've spoken about on the show before. That is, you can be everything, but not at once. And I think it's really important to be transparent with all of you guys listening. Maybe you want to start something new, or you want to start a creative project alongside your 9 to 5, the way that I'm doing it. I think it's really important to be transparent that I am not doing everything all at once, even though it may seem like I am. To give you guys like an illustration of what my typical day looks like, I usually wake up somewhere in between 4:30 and 5 a.m. That's when my alarm clock is set. Usually I get up around 4:45 because it's like sort of in the sweet spot in the middle. But that's how early I start my day. And when I wake up, I will usually do an hour and a half, depending on how early I wake up, of podcasting stuff. And then I will go to the gym at 6 because that's when my gym opens. Then I'll come home, get changed, go to work. I'm usually leaving to go to work around 7:30, 7:45. And then I don't come home from work usually until 7:30, 7:45 p.m. And I'll be honest, sometimes when I get home from work, like the last thing I want to do is the podcast because it's more work. So sometimes I will just sit there and, read a book or watch TV or whatever. But a lot of the days I am coming home and I am doing more podcast things. It is extremely important to me that I do not do podcast related things while I'm at work. It is extremely important to me that I keep those two things separately because my job, my colleagues, my clients deserve that at the very minimum. Because it is so important to me that I do not do podcast things when I'm at work, other than, like if I'm eating lunch or outside taking like a walk after lunch and I get like a DM where I want to like quickly post a story, I'll do that, right? That I think that's a little bit different. But because generally speaking, I'm extremely strict with myself about not doing anything podcast related while I'm at work, that means that any time that I'm not at work, I'm doing podcast things, which means that my social life has taken a huge step backwards in terms of when I'm able to see my friends, how often I'm able to say yes to going out to social events. Even like taking time for myself is not really something that I'm doing much of these days. I think that's why I'm so regimented about going to the gym every day at 6 a.m. because in a way that is time that I'm like carving out specifically just for me and just for myself. But even when I'm at the gym, like most times I'm listening to a podcast, or if I'm out for a run, I'm listening to a podcast. So I can learn how other people do interviews. I can learn how other people structure their podcast episodes and implement that in my own podcast. So I guess even when I'm doing like something for myself, quote unquote, I'm still sort of doing podcast things, but yeah, that is the reality of what it's been like. There is not a whole lot of balancing that is going on right now. And I'm okay with that because I truly believe that what I am doing, what I am building with respect to this podcast is something bigger than me. And I'm extremely passionate and curious and excited about what this has to bring and how it impacts people and how it helps people, honestly. But I would be lying to you if I said that I have found the perfect formula or I have struck the perfect balance and this is how you do it. And as long as you do it this way, you're going to be fine. All is going to be good. It has been extremely difficult to do both this podcast and my full time job. And I will also say that it would be impossible, if not very, very difficult, to be doing what I'm doing if I didn't have the support of my incredible friends and Abteen. Because I just mentioned how a lot of my friendships and social interactions have taken a step back. And my friends all understand that. They are so understanding, they are so supportive, and they know that just because I'm not seeing them, it doesn't mean that I don't care about them. It doesn't mean that I don't value our friendship. They know that it's because I'm choosing to spend my time differently right now at this stage in my life. And they've all been so incredibly supportive and understanding about that. So, shout out to all of my friends. You guys know who you are. I could not be doing this without you. And sorry, I don't know why I'm like getting emotional right now, but yeah, I genuinely could not be doing this without you. But I also have to shout out my partner Aptine because sometimes I'm getting home at 7:30, 7:45 p.m., sometimes even later. And usually when I get home, dinner will be ready. Like Aptine will have made dinner and he will have made extra so that I have lunch for the next day. So, insofar as balance is concerned, I couldn't be doing what I'm doing without the people in my life that are supporting me doing it. It may seem like I'm doing everything, I'm balancing everything perfectly. I can tell you straight up, I am not. The people in my life can tell you straight up that I am not. But everyone has been so incredibly understanding and so incredibly supportive. And that's the only reason why I've been able to do as much as I can with regards to both things that I'm pursuing. Okay, the third question is, have you received any negative pressure from the legal community? If so, how do you mentally deal with it and feel motivated to continue? I love this question. And I'm going to be giving a very lawyer answer, which is in terms of receiving any negative pressure, I would say yes and no. What I mean by that is when you start anything, whether it's a podcast like this, whether it's a business, whether it's, I don't know, even wanting to like post more on LinkedIn, when you start anything that is a little bit different from what the norm is or what most people do, there will be skeptics, there will be critics, there will be people who roll their eyes and sigh and say, what is she thinking starting a podcast? Like, the fact that she thinks it's going to be successful is stupid, you know? You will be made fun of. I know that since starting this podcast, I have been made fun of. But one of my best friends and longest friends, shout out Kalista, said this to me a few weeks ago, and it really stuck with me, which is people will view your life and your decisions through their eyes. And what she meant by that is oftentimes I think when you're starting something new and you're doing something a little bit different, you want the approval of others. You want others to say to you, good job. This is a great idea. Thumbs up. But the truth is, if you're doing something truly innovative, truly different, truly that has the power to change the world, it only matters that you believe in it, not anyone else. Because if everyone thought that what you're doing is the best idea ever, then they'd be doing it too, right? You may want the approval of other people at the end of the day, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what they think. All that it matters is that you know who you are, you have enough belief in what you're doing, and you're confident that you're going to succeed. It has honestly been easy for me to deal with any negativity that may exist out there of people making fun of me or people rolling their eyes at the fact that I'm starting a podcast like everyone's mom and their dog's aunt. I don't know. But it's easy for me to deal with it because the people that I'm surrounded by, whose opinions I care about, whose opinions I respect, and whose opinions matter to me, those people have been incredibly, incredibly supportive. Just to sort of illustrate this, I have a friend, Alexa, who every single week on Tuesday mornings when the episodes drop, I will get like a string of texts from her at like 7 in the morning because she's listening to my podcast and she's responding to every single thing that I'm saying. And she'll, be giving me her thoughts while she's listening to it. It's stuff like that that makes it really easy to deal with and makes me very motivated to continue. And this extends not just to the people who are close to me. There have been so many people, like I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, from all around the world, like messaging me and telling me that certain things that I've said have resonated with them or that it made them feel seen. There has been so much support that it's been easy to want to continue. And for that, I've got to say it again. Thank you. Okay, fourth question, and I freaking love this question. The question is, how do you keep getting banger guests as a startup podcaster? I have had some banger guests, haven't I? I agree with that. They have been so amazing and so awesome. Okay, so let me tell you guys how I have gotten these guests. I'm going to start with the first two guests that I had, which was Jules Romano, famously known as Jules the Lawyer on TikTok, and Hannah Choi, who is known as 18 Hens on social media. Because I think those two fell into a bit of a different category than every other guest that I've had on or am about to have on to the podcast. Jules and Hannah will forever be two people who I am eternally grateful for because both of these women agreed to come onto my podcast when I had less than 200 downloads collectively. I think the exact number of downloads I had when Jules said yes, because she was the first one, was 138. The way that I got Jules, and I'm putting in air quotes for those who are listening to this episode and not watching, I'm putting air quotes around got, because the story was basically I posted a TikTok. This was very early on. I think it was like a month in. I always knew that I wanted to interview guests on this podcast, but I was very scared and worried about reaching out to people because I just assumed that everyone was going to say no. I don't know why. I do not know why that was like a thought that occurred in my mind, but I just thought that everyone was going to say no. So I posted this like silly TikTok about how I was scared of reaching out to people because I was scared that people were going to say no. And specifically in that video, I mentioned how like I would have loved to interview Jules the Lawyer, for example, but I was scared that if I reached out and she said no, that meant that she was never going to come onto the show and that no was going to be a no forever. And not thinking that this would even do anything, I tagged her in the video. And to my surprise, she responded. And I remember she reposted the video, she liked it, and then she commented. I had first commented on my own video, like 1 like, and Jules has to come onto this podcast or something like that. And she responded and she commented on the video and she said, done. So yeah, from there, I reached out to her over email. We chatted about some of the details. I laugh at the word details because like I I was literally just like flying by the seat of my pants. Like I had never recorded in a studio before. I never even looked at podcast studios around the city. I was like messaging all these different podcast studios. I was taking tours at all these different podcast studios. I feel like that could be like a whole other episode in and of itself. But yeah, that's how she ultimately came on. And with Hannah, I think I may have had a bit of an unfair advantage because I had a good friend from law school who knew Hannah personally. He had like met her a few times and sort of knew her. So he had messaged me and was like, you should have Hannah onto your podcast. This is her story. And so then he actually reached out to her first and said, look, I've got this friend. She's doing this podcast. This is what the show is about. Would you be willing to come on? And then it was from that, after I sort of got like the green light from that message, that I reached out to her, and then things were set up. So, but since then, every single guest that I have gone onto this podcast, or sorry, not every single one, almost every single one has been a cold reach out. I usually try to find an email address if I can, and I will send that person an email. And I am really specific about the people that I want onto the show. Every single email that I send is incredibly personalized, because even before I send the email, I will do a ton of research on that guest. So I know exactly what their story is, or at least what the outside version or the social media version of their story is. I will have an idea for what I want to talk about with them. So what the episode would look like and why I think my listeners would resonate with what they have to share and what they have to say. I do not send mass emails to people. I do not copy and paste one email and plop it into another. Obviously, there's like my intro paragraph that's the same, because why would that change? It's me introducing who I am, right? But other than that, every single email is personalized because I put in a lot of thought into every single guest who I reach out to. And every guest who I reach out to is somebody that I genuinely want on the podcast for a specific reason and a specific purpose. And I think that when you're able to customize it to that level, people can tell. And I think, at least, that's the reason why I've been so successful in getting people to say yes. That's not to say, by the way, that everyone who I've reached out to has said yes. I had one girl, I remember, she this was very, very early on. I think she was like maybe the second person I ever reached out to. She said no. Like, she straight up sent me an email and said, no, don't have the capacity to do this, which is totally fine. But I've had a lot of people ignore me as well. And so sometimes when they ignore me, I will like follow up, or I'll try to follow up on like a different platform. There's one person in particular who I really want onto this show. I've messaged him on LinkedIn, on Instagram, and emailed him, or at least I think I emailed him. I don't actually know if it was the right email. So that's sort of like we'll put an asterisk beside email there, but he has not responded to any of my attempts. So I'm not sure what I'm going to do there, but I will keep trying. I mean, obviously there's a line between, like, you don't want to be too annoying, like you don't want to pester them, right? But I also think that it's really easy to just like miss an Instagram DM. It's really easy to forget about an email, especially if it's coming from somebody who you don't know or you're not familiar with, right? So I try to employ the mentality of, it's not a no until it's a no. And even when it is a no, I'm confident that it's not going to be a no forever. So yeah, that's how I've done it, and it's actually been really cool because recently I've started to get some inbound as well. So people reaching out to me, wanting to share their stories and wanting to be on the show. Anybody who wants to be on the show and wants to share the story, I encourage you to reach out. But I obviously can't say yes to everyone, although I am trying to think of a different way to share these stories, perhaps a little bit less formally than a formal interview. So stay tuned about that. But that has been incredibly cool. But yeah, that is how I'm getting these banger guests. just cold reaching out. Okay, this next question is a really kind one. The question was, were you always a talented public speaker, or did you build that skill set over time? Any tips? First of all, this was such a kind comment to receive because I've actually been really, really critical of myself and how I'm speaking. I listen to every single episode that I put out more than once because I'm listening to it obviously as I'm editing it. I'm listening to it when I do like my quality check before I post it. And then usually I'll do a quality check after I post it to make sure that the sound is normal and everything is fine and there's no parts that got screwed up or cut out accidentally or whatever. So I usually listen to every single episode at least 3 times before posting it. Or not, sorry, not before posting it, but you know what I mean. And within every single time, I notice things about myself that I want to change. I notice a like, I notice an I notice myself sometimes not being as straightforward or as direct with the things that I want to say. Like I sort of go on a tangent a little bit and then come back to my point. I've been so critical about my quote unquote public speaking skills. So to see a comment like that is very, very kind. And I think it also just shows that you really are your worst critic. You will notice things about yourself that most people probably won't notice, or if they do notice, they probably don't care about. Like it's not even a thing that crosses their mind. On this note, I posted an episode with Abtine and Megan a few weeks ago, and this was an episode that the three of us recorded together. And I came home one day and Abtine was listening to it after I had posted it, so it was playing on the speakers in our home. And we were listening to it for a bit, and then he like paused it, and I was like, why did you pause it? Like what's going on? He's like, oh, I just need to like change the way that I speak. And I'm like, what do you mean change the way that you speak? He's like, yeah, I just use like too big of words. Normal people don't speak like that. Like I need to be better at saying my ideas in a less complex way. And I was like kind of shocked because I'm like, I feel like you don't use that big of words. Like I have never listened. Again, I listened to every episode at least 3 times before I post it, right? Like at no point was I listening to this episode thinking, God, I wish Aptine would use less big words, right? Like smaller words. That was never a thought that occurred in my mind. But for him, he was noticing that. He was being like uber critical of himself. And he was like seeing that as a negative because he was thinking that it was making him less relatable, right? So anyway, that's just, I don't mean to throw Abdin under the bus there, but that's, I guess, another example of being your worst critic. But to answer the actual question of do you build that skill set over time, any tips? So, despite my own critiques about my public speaking skills, I love public speaking. I know it's like a taboo thing to say because most people don't like public speaking, but it is genuinely one of my passions and my favorite part about this, but also my job, my professional job as a lawyer. Like, I've talked about this before. I'm like not too big on like the writing thing, but speaking, being in court, like making submissions, even speaking with clients, just like telling stories, I love that stuff. Like that is my jam. And whether or not I'm good at it is like a separate question, but do I love it? Yes. So I think the reason why I say that is because I love public speaking so much. It's easy to want to put myself in situations where I'm getting a lot of public speaking practice, right? And to be honest, there is really no other substitute for putting in the work and putting in the reps. Practicing something is the only thing that will guarantee you will get better at it. And so for me personally, I think because I like public speaking, because it's always been a passion of mine, I have no problem putting myself in situations where I'm getting that practice and I'm putting in those reps. But for other people, it might be a little bit different, especially if you're somebody who hates public speaking, right? For those people, I would say that if you have done a public speaking gig or you're preparing for a public speaking gig, honestly, one of the best things to do is to record yourself and to critique yourself. They say this all the time in my line of work, which is if you want to become like a better cross examiner, you have to read your own transcripts. I remember one of the first like big cross examinations I ever did. Um, I got a transcript of the cross, and then I was like, I had to read it and go through it. And it's funny because like one of my friends had said to me, because she was in court with me. She's a lawyer too, by the way. It's like she wasn't just in court to like watch me, but she, after I did the cross, she was like saying to me how it was so cute that every time I got an answer that I was like happy with or satisfied with or that I expected, I would make a comment like, totally, or for sure. Like literally start off, I'd respond to the answer I just got. So I'd be like, that shirt was blue, right? And the witness would be like, yes. And I'd be like, totally. And then I'd go on to my next question. But it's funny because when she said that to me, I didn't even realize that I had done that. And it wasn't until that I read the transcript of my cross-examination of this witness that I realized that I was doing that. I was making these like totally unnecessary comments. And I think it was obviously coming from a place of being perhaps a bit nervous, or just like reacting in the moment and maybe not being fully aware of the fact that I was saying that. But it was only through actually physically seeing myself on paper say those words that I realized that I had a habit of saying those words. And so the next time that I did a cross examination, I was very aware to not do that. So obviously, most public engagement speakers, or not speakers, sorry, speaking, most public speaking engagements, yes, that's what I want to say. Most public speaking engagements do not come with a transcript, like they're not transcribed, but you could record yourself. And I would honestly, as much as you're going to hate it and as much as you're going to feel weird and cringe and uncomfortable about it, listening to yourself, observing yourself, and then critiquing yourself is the only way you're going to be able to get better. So, yeah, that's what I would say. Okay, the last question that I'm going to address, and there are like so many other questions I want to talk about, including one where somebody asked me if I could walk through the financials of starting a podcast. And I definitely want to do that. I actually think I want to do that as a bigger episode though. So I'm going to save some of these questions for a later episode. But the last question that I want to answer today for you guys is this one, which is there anything new that you've learned about yourself through the podcasting process that you don't think you would have learned but for starting a podcast? When I got this question, I had to like really sit down and think and reflect about what my answer was going to be, because there are, I think, so many things that I've learned from starting this podcast. But I can boil it down to two main things. The first thing I learned about starting this podcast that I don't think I would have known but for starting this podcast is how transferable the skills that I have built up to this point has been for a project like this. What I mean by that is there are so many skills that I have spent over the last 7 years of being in law and working towards becoming a lawyer and being a lawyer that have been transferable to podcasting. For example, one of the most valuable skills that I gained from law school and my career in law has been being able to read, understand, absorb, and then synthesize a large volume of information. I mean, so much of the job is being able to do that, right? And also how to use everything that you know, all the facts that you've learned, how to put that into a comprehensible? Yeah, that's a word. Yeah, that's a word. And how to put that into a comprehensible narrative. That is exactly what I do every single time I'm preparing for a guest episode. I research, I learn as much as I can. I go through everything that I can. about that person, everything that I can find, all the information I can find about them. And then I have to draft an outline of what the episode is going to be or what type of questions I want to ask. And I think that's another skill as well, which is it is a skill set to be able to ask questions in order to elicit certain responses that you want. And that is a skill set that I think I first started crafting when I became a lawyer. Because as a lawyer, you're drafting cross examinations and examinations in chief, and especially with examinations in chief. So the difference for those of you who don't know is examination in chief is when you're asking questions of a witness that you're putting on the stand. So the rule is that you're not allowed to ask leading questions, meaning that every question that you ask has to be what's called an open-ended question. So an example is instead of saying your name is Anna, correct? You have to say, what is your name? And then the answer is Anna, right? Whereas the closed-ended question, or what's called the leading question, you can make a suggestion. You can say, your name is Anna, correct? And the answer will be yes. That's all to say that it is very challenging to craft questions in a way that will elicit a certain response from someone. And that's because the way that you interpret a question is not necessarily the way that somebody else will interpret a question. And another thing that I found extremely helpful is that when I'm actually in the episode and doing the episode, I obviously have my outline, but I'm not always following it, right? Because sometimes the guest will say something that leads me down like another path, and maybe it's something that I want to explore. Maybe it's something I don't know about yet, but I think it's interesting and I want to explore. And I remember when I did my very first guest interview, which was with Nathan Ng, one of my close friends, but also the sous chef at the Ritz-Carlton, who started his journey as a neuroscience student. I remember thinking, like, as we were chatting, as we were going through the episode and recording, I was thinking, like, there are a lot of parallels between cross-examination in court and interviewing a guest, because when you're in court and the witness is on the stand, sometimes they'll say something that just like leads you down like a completely different direction, and you have to make a split-second decision as to, okay, am I going to stick with the outline that I've prepared and the questions that I've prepared to ask, or am I going to follow this answer down whatever path it may take me? And obviously, podcasting is a lot different from court, because if I don't like the answer, if I don't like the path that it took me down, I can just like cut it, right? So it doesn't really matter. Whereas court, you can't like, there's no takesy backsies with an answer that a witness gives on the stand. So it's different, obviously. But I did find that there were some parallels in between that, which is like, in that moment, I have to make a decision about where the episode is going to go and how to direct the episode in a way that I want and how to keep it on track. And I think all of those skills are skills that I develop in my legal practice, which has been very transferable to podcasting, apparently. So that's the first thing that I learned. And the reason why I mention that is because I think so many of us, and I know this is true for a lot of my listeners, we take on a bunch of different jobs before we get to the place that we really want to go. And sometimes that process can be very grueling and maybe at times a bit discouraging. But I really do think it's true that every skill that you've developed will have applicability into the next thing that you do. It's sort of like a spillover effect. And you may not realize it at the time, but I think it's so important to treat every single opportunity, whether it or not it's your sort of end goal, treat every single opportunity as a learning opportunity and try to grow and try to learn and develop as many skills as you can, because you never know when it's going to be transferable into the next thing that you're doing. So that's why I wanted to share that. The other thing that I learned since starting this whole process is the importance of taking yourself seriously. Coming from a profession where there's already a film of respect and prestige inherently wrapped around it, what I'm doing now with this podcast is in some ways the opposite of that. there is no inherent prestige or societal value that I think, generally speaking, people attribute to somebody who is starting a podcast, right? It's not like if I was in high school and I told my Asian mother, after high school, I'm going to be a podcaster. She would not be thrilled, okay? It's not one of those things that I think attracts an inherent level of prestige. And now, obviously, having done this podcast for about 3 months, I know how much work goes into this. I know how many different skills, both soft skills and hard skills, go into creating a podcast, especially a successful one. I know that now, but it's not something I think that is very visible on the surface. Whereas a profession like law is, right? You say that you're going to law school and everyone's like clapping, right? Like, oh, great, you're so smart. That what a great thing. But it's not like when you say, oh, I'm doing a podcast, that people are like, oh my God, you must be so smart. You must be so hardworking. You must be so good with people. Like, none of that happens. So the only person who knows how hard you work, who knows how much time you're putting into this, who sees this beyond the early stages of what it is now into a year, 2 years, dare I say 5 years from now, as the success that you believe it's going to be, you are the only one that can speak to that vision. And so, if you want other people to see that vision too, if you want people to take you seriously, you have got to take yourself seriously. And that is something that I have had to learn throughout this process. And I'm still learning. I still find myself all the time falling back into this natural state of, oh, it's just like a silly little podcast, right? It's not. It's not a silly little podcast. If this was a silly little podcast, there'd be no reason for me to be waking up at 4:30 in the morning every morning and not seeing my friends because I'm editing an episode in the evenings, right? Like, I'm not doing this because this is a silly little podcast. I'm doing this because I genuinely believe that it has the potential to help millions of people, and I genuinely believe that it will. So the discrepancy comes when you have a vision for something, but you're not willing to talk about it. Maybe out of fear that you're going to be made fun of, or out of fear that you're not going to achieve it, or out of fear that you're going to come off as sounding arrogant or braggy or anything like that, right? But I genuinely do believe that in order to be successful at anything, you have to be the one to believe it first. And so every single day, I'm trying to take this podcast as seriously as I want you guys to take it. So that's something that I'm still struggling with, but I do think that I'm getting better. And I hope that with time, I will continue to get better. And that is definitely something that I would not have learned before starting this podcast. So thank you for that question. That was a great question. Okay, guys, that concludes the episode for today. I'm not going to be sharing a Confessions Vault story this week because I didn't receive one. So whose fault is that? Yours. Okay, sorry. I'm not going to put the blame on you, lovely, perfect, angelic, could do no wrong listeners, obviously. But if you do have a story that you want to share with me and with the audience, please feel free to tell me. Like I said, the 3 ways of contacting me: you can comment, you can message me privately on Instagram, or you can tell me all about your story in the Confessions Vault. I will post that link in the episode description below. As a final reminder, please, please, please like, comment, subscribe. The more I ask, the more I feel like Bernie Sanders back. You know that meme of Bernie Sanders that's like, I am once again asking you to whatever, donate to my presidency campaign or whatever. Yeah, the more I ask, the more I feel like him. So please, please, please do me a favor and just spare me feeling like Bernie Sanders, because we all know how the presidential election went for him that year. But thank you so much, everyone, for listening, for sending in those questions, for continuing to be a part of this journey, for being part of this community. If you want to continue seeing episodes like this where I'm doing like a long form explanation of the behind the scenes and what building this podcast has been like. Please let me know, because that way I can ensure that I will produce more episodes like this for you guys. Like I said, there were so many other questions that I got that were so good and so insightful, but I just don't have the time to answer all of the questions today. So there will likely be another episode. I already mentioned the fact that I wanted to do an episode sort of breaking down like the financials and exactly what it takes to start a podcast. If that is at all of interest to you guys, please let me know, and I will be sure to produce more of those. So, anyway, thank you for sticking around. Thanks for listening to me ramble for this last, I don't know how long this episode's going to be, like maybe an hour. I've got so many exciting guests coming up, and I can't wait to share that with you guys. See you next week.